you doing in Indianapolis? You're making a lot of noise over there.
Yeah, we're having a ton of fun.
Yeah?
Yeah, we've been here about 11 years now. It's hard to believe. So, the church that I serve is, I think, one of the oldest churches in our movement of churches. Got started in 1834, so it's been around a long time, and it's been cool to see how God's kind of breathed new life into it, and it's we're having a lot of fun, man.
It wasn't originally called Traders Point though. What was it called?
Ebenezer.
Right on.
Yeah, Ebenezer Christian Church. I don't know when it changed. Sometime back in the 40s or 50s, they changed the name.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, that's a. I read that somewhere. The church has got a lot of history. I mean, a lot of history. I mean, so there's.
Yeah.
How many people do you have that are currently there with you that can even trace back, maybe a generation or two back?
On staff or in the church?
In the church.
I mean, that's hard to say. Maybe a couple hundred, maybe 200 or 300 people could remember. Yeah. Yeah.
I read this article, Indianapolis Monthly.
Oh yeah.
Are you familiar with the one I'm talking about?
Is it the one they had like the double wide trailer haul in the white church into downtown?
My favorite line from the whole thing, the very last part, and I couldn't imagine putting something together, writing something, putting it out there, articles like this, and there's no comments, there's no nothing on it. This guy's got a great last line. Church leaders at TPCC insist they have no concrete plan or target objectives for the larger expansion, and that God is guiding the process. As leaps of faith go, 4.9 million is a big one, especially when the intention is to fly in the face of accepted wisdom. The rewards for a megachurch that could tap into the state's largest market would be huge, though. The meek may inherit the earth, but downtown Indy is up for grabs. Downtown Indy's up for grabs. I loved it. It's a good one.
Yeah, she was trying her best. We met with her several times, and she was trying her absolute best to find dirt on us. And man, she was just. It's interesting though, because that was 2 years ago, and it's worked.
Yeah.
And there's been no follow-up article, so
yeah.
How that goes. But
yeah, there's a sense when somebody comes in and they begin to, oh yeah, you're doing something new. Are you doing something? What's it going to be good? Is it going to be big? Yeah, right. Is it going to suck? Watch that. There's that, and that's kind of a tough deal.
Yeah.
So you're on this list. Let's talk about this obvious thing. You're on this list of the fastest growing church in the U.S. Is there any sort of panic that ever just hits you from time to time? It's like, oh gosh, what if I drop the ball? Anything like this?
Nah, no, not really. I mean, there's kind of a running joke with that list. It's like the outreach 100 fastest growing. And It's like a running joke. It's like, well, who reads that? Well, about 100 people.
Right.
So it's just, it kind of is what it is. I don't even know how we get on there. I think that I think we've been on it a few times, but they end up contacting like our communications department and just asking us about our growth rate. We tell them, and then they tell us, hey, congratulations, you guys are the 52nd fastest growing church or whatever. And that's kind of get on it. And honestly, like, it's to the point now where it's just like, well, that's nice, but it's not that big of a deal. I mean, I know that there's churches that should be on that list, but they're not because they don't report their numbers or whatever. So it's just sort of what it is. In my mind, I just kind of frame it up to, hey, what's God doing around the world? And I kind of like to browse through the list and just become familiar with churches, especially churches that are not in our circle.
Yeah.
Hey, man, how's God working in those churches, and what can we learn from them? But, it's one of those things where I don't think we need to clearly get a big head about it nor panic, because it just is what it is. So
yeah. I talked to a guy not too long ago, and younger guy, and he made the comment, Well, in ministry, he said the thing for me is he said I just really have to work hard on not becoming prideful, you know. And I thought you should spend a little bit more time with the bride of Christ. It won't take long at all, you know. I mean,
That's right.
it doesn't even become a checks and balances thing anymore. It's that, am I being too cocky? But no, listen, if you're working with the church, it's really hard to get a big head, you know. I mean, it's
Oh
really
yeah.
hard,
Oh
really
yeah.
hard out there. So
Well, the thing that comes with those numbers is just bigger problems and more headaches. And
yeah,
I sit down every year with pastors of churches over 5,000. We get together every September, and you just go around the table, and just the list of problems is a mile long, man. I mean, the amount of stress and the load that comes with all that. So bigger is certainly not sexier.
yeah, yeah. It looks that way from the outside. It's kind of like you go to the gym and you see some guy and he's really really fit, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just all chiseled up, and you say to him, you say, so what's your diet, bro? Like, I gotta know, like, what's your diet? And they all of them lie. They all lie. He'll be like, really, it's really not that good. My diet's really not that good. And it's like, oh, yeah, sure, right, yeah. And so then
Yeah.
you see a great big fat guy at the gym, and he's over there sweating to death on the treadmill. Hey, fella, how's your diet? He's like, it's really not that bad. It's really not so bad. It's kind of the same idea. There's you get somebody who look for you where you are doing what you do in your place, like, to you this is probably very much just a norm. Like, anybody wakes up and does this thing and has to manage campuses or has to manage more staff. But you take a rural guy, his norm is completely different. He's going to wake up, he's going to fix the drain, he's going to go drive the school bus, and he's going to work on his sermon on Thursday,
Yeah. Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing that helps me too is that I've not always been in this context. I mean, my when I was at Ozark, my preaching point on the weekends was a church of 15 people. I think the
Wow.
highest attendance ever in that 4 years that I was there was like 25 people, and that was because it was Christmas and they had family come into town. And from there, when I was in seminary, I preached at a church in Southern Illinois of 180 people, and then planted a church in California. I was there 5 years. It grew to a whopping 125. So I I understand that context, and so I even had I mean, all 11 years that we've been here, the church has grown, and I've actually had people come up to me who knew me during my church planting years and said, "Hey, man, what are you doing different now than what you were
uh,
doing then?" And I
yeah.
was just like, "Well, no, well, yes, there's some things I'm doing different that come from just my own personal growth, but it's not like I that said, man, I was doing it all wrong, and I found this equation, or I read a book, and then I just
Right.
told called my leadership, and bam, we got." I'm really thankful for those years because even now, like, I just don't want to get too high with the highs and too low with the lows. And there's so many factors that come into numerical growth that none of us have control over. You know, what's the density of your population? Where's your church located? How are your systems? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. It's not just. I think we'd all like to think, well, man, I'm preaching better sermons, and so all these people show up, and that's like, no, that's
Right.
not it. So I think just not taking yourself too seriously, so that way, and honestly, like, even now, I mean, a good weekend for us will be 10,000 people. We drop below 8,000, which is entirely possible to do. Like, the swings get bigger. The stuff in my heart is the exact same thing than when I was preaching in a church of 15 people.
Good
I
for
was
you.
preaching 15 people and 8 people showed up. I was having a bad week after that. I'm preaching in a church of 10,000 and less than 8,000 show up. I'm having a bad week. The heart's still the heart. It doesn't matter if all these who's showing up on the weekend. And I think it was just very helpful for me to realize that and to recognize it. We all work in different parts of the vineyard, and I have no idea why God brings the increase or the opposite. But it's not. It's certainly not because of my giftedness or your gift or our weaknesses or strengths. I know that.
So you had these people coming. They're just like, Brockett used to give us all that secondhand, those hand-me-down sermons he got from his grandpa or whatever he got him. And now he went to the big city and he put on his big city preaching, and so it's not that bad then. Not that, that's good. That brings me to a question. Um, the idea of, and this is my own thought. I'm curious about anybody else's opinion on this. being called to the vocation, um, are we also called to the location, to the places that we go? There's a certain kind of fabric that maybe fits you and fits you well, and you kind of found, maybe you even found a little bit more, a better perspective, a clearer picture of who you are in that place, or you connect well with these people, and that was kind of unexpected. Is that too out there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the question's nuanced. I mean, I think your people can sense where your heart is. So, um, I never saw myself living in Indiana. I always wanted to live in Southern California. In fact, like, I tried really hard for probably about a decade to find a ministry in Southern California, and it just never worked. It was like God just kept keeping the doors closed. Um, and I never saw myself in Indiana, and I tried not to. I said no to coming here, and this is where we ended up being. And yet, as soon as I moved here, I just felt this sense of like peace that this is where God had called us to, and I've had no desire to leave Indiana. Now, during the winter, I sometimes wonder, why God has us here. It's brutal,
Right.
um, but um, I love what He's doing in the city. I developed a real heart for this city, and I've even said publicly up front, like I really want to live out the rest of my days here. Um, and yet still very open, if God decided to redirect us. I guess what I'm saying is that wherever you happen to be now, whether it's 6 months or 60 years, be fully present. I think that's just more important than anything. It's like, could God move you on from another location? Yeah, He does it all the time. He did it in the New Testament. But while you're in a location, don't be looking out ahead that you actually miss not only what God wants to do through you there, but how God wants to develop you through that particular assignment. And I think if your people will sense whether or not you're grazing in other fields or looking, to other locations. Um, it's just so important, I think, to be planted where we're planted until He moves.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of guys. There's a lot of guys, and I'm sure you had them from. When did you graduate? When did you graduate Ozark?
98.
Okay. Um, I graduated in 2004, but I was in other places prior to that. I was off gallivanting across the country doing other things.
Mm-hmm.
And when when I got there, and you graduate school, a lot of guys went into ministry, and then like 2 years later they were gone, and then 2 years later they were at the next place, and 2 years later the next place. And even up to now, I mean, guys I know that they're probably on like their 10th place maybe, you
Yeah.
know, just on the
Yeah.
go all the time. And I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm not sure that I'm not suggesting that it's bad necessarily, um, but it seems like it would be very hard to commit and form relationships, um, to carry out. I mean, it seems. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it goes to motivation of the heart. I mean, I think that, I don't know about you, but right out of Ozark, um, I remember the day I graduated, like, oh crap, what now? Like, where do I go next?
Right.
And we didn't necessarily have, multi-site campuses didn't exist. Church planting wasn't even really that much of a thing at that particular time. You either went on the mission field, you became a youth pastor, or you preached in a small church, or you got a position on staff at one of the bigger churches, which there wasn't that many bigger churches then. So that just it wasn't much. Were really talented, great preachers, love the Lord, who within the first 5 to 10 years out of Ozark got eaten up in just unhealthy situations. And it's kind of like when you graduate, you sort of like go, hey, I'll take whatever's open because
Yeah.
let me get in there. And it's sort of like the sea turtles all running into the sea. Are they going to get snatched up? Are they going to get taken? I mean, I look back on all that. I wouldn't wish that on my son for anything. And
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I survived a lot of it because there was some unhealthy situations in my first couple of years of ministry, and I just didn't have the wisdom to deal with it. And so there's that aspect of it where, you get into a place and you serve, and then you begin to figure out what your calling practically looks more like, and then you go to a different place, or God opens up another opportunity. I think there's that. There's a very different thing, though, whenever you're using a ministry as a stepping stone to go on to something bigger and better. And I think we have to be careful about that. I think just the motivations of your heart are um, really crucial. And if you're always looking for it's kind of like, relationships. You can fertilize your lawn, or you can, be looking somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that guys who are constantly jumping from one ministry to the next, um, they got to ask themselves, why are they running from problems? Because there's problems in any ministry, people issues. And so I'm a little bit fearful of guys who are constantly popcorning around, because have they ever really stayed long enough to really work through conflict in such a way that's then helping them to mature as a leader? And statistically, in a lot of ministries, I forget where I read this, but it was like pastors produce more fruit in their ministries after year 10, at the age of 40 or up. And
Hmm.
it's like, if you can hang in there and go through the ups and the downs. And I mean, I'm in a sweet spot right now here, because I'm in my 11th year. I'm 42, and there are just some things that I can get away with now that I couldn't have gotten away with 8, 9, 10 years ago. And by getting away, I'm not talking about anything unethical or immoral. I'm just saying there just comes with like a leadership sort of clout and an experience, and I've earned people's trust. Whereas you just got to hang in there long enough to do that. And I'm always just a little bit fearful when pastors leave and they're running. They're just leaving their mess for somebody else to try to clean up, and that didn't help the kingdom of God at all.
Yeah, I agree. That's a scary. I think that's a good insight. Are they running from their inability to, deal with conflict? To maybe they've run completely out of, everything that they're willing to share of themselves, and
Yeah,
not willing to cross that threshold of, relationships cost.
yeah,
And there's a certain amount of pain that comes to great relationships.
yep.
That you end up giving more of you. And when I say pain in great relationships, I just mean that great relationships oftentimes come with a certain amount of, struggle and
They
to
all do.
get. And I think with a congregation, there is this is very strange relationship between a preacher and the person who hears him speak weekly. That there's a trust that forms. There's probably not much different, maybe a little different, but probably not much different than the way some people feel about certain celebrities who they've watched them all the way through 10 seasons of Friends, or Seinfeld. The idea that like I know this person, and then they pull the show and it's gone. It's like, what? It's like I lost my family. That
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
mentality. And I think
I,
that. Go ahead.
I can remember in my very first ministry, is a church of 180 people in a town of 900 in Southern Illinois. And I remember I came in, I was 23 years old, and I was trying to change something. I don't remember even what it was, but I remember there was a group of older people that were against it. And in sitting down to listen to them, I remember there was one lady in the room. She was a widow, and her insight really struck at the core of this. I think she just looked at me and she said, "Aaron, we love you, but why should we do what you say? You'll be gone in 2 years."
Ah,
And I remember thinking, that's what they've gotten used to. Like these guys come in, maybe graduates or maybe not graduates, maybe they're just in there for 2 to 3 years and then they move on. And so the congregation has learned, well, why should you take the steering wheel and drift us all the way over here into this other thing when you're not even going to be around? And she had a great point. It should cause, I think, all of us to sit there and say, I've even coached guys before that are talking to me about, maybe changing their systems or changing their worship services or whatever. And I always ask, how long are you going to be there? Because if you honestly can't tell me that you're going to be here more than 5 years, don't do it. Like, just love those people and serve them faithfully. But like when I got to Trader's Point, there was all kinds of things that needed to be changed. I waited like 18 months to do any sort of significant change. Um, because I just needed to learn the culture, learn the city. I didn't want to cast vision in the wrong direction, and I needed to make sure, is this some place that I feel like God's called me to long term? Within that first year, I knew that it was, and so I was able to have the courage and the conviction to be able to make some decisions that I knew would shake some people up, but I also knew that I'd be around long enough to walk them through it.
Mm, that's smart. That's real smart. It's almost like what do they call it? Reactive attachment disorder.
Mm.
Um, people who've been abandoned over and over and over and over and over.
Oh yeah.
Their ability to attach then becomes, I mean, almost impossible.
Right.
You take youth ministers, for instance. I mean, I don't know what the statistic is now, but the average youth ministry stay is like 18 months.
Yeah.
And they're gone. They send them packing, and the new guy shows up. He's just got to have skinnier jeans and a cooler flat bill, or I mean, whatever it is, you got to listen to the right music, and
Yeah.
and, and maybe he can make an impact, and we can milk that for all it's worth, and then he'll be gone in 18 months. It's kind of that thought process. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an insightful question for guys that you're gonna spend some time mentoring uh,
Yeah.
into. Yeah, that's a good question.
Leadership. I was listening to Erwin McManus and his son Aaron have a podcast called Battle Ready, and I was listening to one of their last episodes called "We Have No Succession Plan," because Erwin's 60 and I think his son's close to 30. And one of the big questions I get all the time is, "Hey, when are you going to hand this off to your son?" And so they're basically, their conversation is, "Hey, we have no succession plan because we feel like that's more of like a kingly way to operate. We need to operate more like prophets, and so let's just serve in that." And shoot, this thought just got scared out of me.
Oh
Um,
man, well you got me on pins and needles,
it was a
Brockett.
good one too, man.
Well, pins and
Uh,
needles here. This
what
idea.
were we talking about? We were talking about
We're talking about attachment, reactive attachment disorder, and mentoring other guys. No succession plan. Not going to stay in a place. Telling people, are you going to be there at least 5 years?
yeah. Oh, I remember what it is. He because here's the deal with like leaders. Leaders' job isn't to be the smartest person in the room or to make all the right calls or to grow the church. Even a leader is somebody who can develop and bring people along to with the decision. So Erwin was talking to his son Aaron, and he has two kids, a daughter and his son. And I guess the daughter Mariah is like more talented than Aaron. And all through growing up, he would say, "Dad, what's God going to do with me? Mariah's got all the talent. She can speak, she can sing, all that." And Erwin said that he would say to his son all the time, he would say, "If God's given you tons of vision and not as much talent, then He's given you the gift of leadership. Because if you had all the vision and yourself and to make it all about you." And so that really connected to me because I don't see myself as the most talented guy. There's lots of people that are way more talented than me, and I'm certainly not the smartest guy in the room by any stretch of the imagination. But our job as leaders is to collaborate with people and bring them along. And I always get really nervous whenever there's leaders that just kind of jerk the steering wheel according to the latest fads and trends, or because they just want to see the church grow for whatever reason. And you've got to be able to sit down with a group of people that may be contrarian or may have a different point of view and cast a vision, hear them out, and lead them to a place together. And you just can't do that in 2 years or less. It just takes a long time. And so I think it's really important for us to, as leaders and as preachers, to really check our motives
Yeah.
and to not leave causing more damage than necessary.
Yeah. Do you have a group of guys around you that kind of uh, spend their time, maybe that you've invited in, or maybe they've just taken the position of, who run the checks and balances on Aaron Brockett?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's it work?
Would you say, how's it work?
Yeah, how's it work?
So guys at different levels and different groups. I mean, it for me, it's not just one group of guys. I've got to have different levels, and so obviously my elders would play a role in that, but not the role. My executive team around me plays a part in that, but obviously that's not the only group. But I've also got like a life group within the church. These are guys that are not on staff. These are guys that are, I'd say maybe half of them have been believers for more than a decade. The other half either aren't or they're brand new.
Mm.
And so they're pretty green when it comes to ministry. And I actually get some of my best like counsel and feedback from those guys because they have no baggage or uh, influence perspective from ministry people or Bible college. They just see it all through a very different lens. It's often very, very refreshing.
Yeah.
And just being willing to be very vulnerable with those guys, yeah, I think is really huge. And then I've got a group of guys outside of this place, whether it's we're touching base. We do an annual fly fishing trip in Montana where there's a group of about 12 to 15 of us that get together. We get very, very real around that time. And then we just invited in um, uh, tools and resources onto our team. Like I did an emotional intelligence 360 test about 2 years ago, which was brutal. And I basically had like two people from staff, two elders, all my executive team, and then two lead pastors outside of our church that just know me take this anonymous test on me online, basically just measuring my emotional intelligence. And so it's just all raw and unfiltered. How do I affect? Does Aaron Brockett and my leadership affect you? What's your perspective? What's your observations about me? And dude, when I read that report, the room started spinning because it was unfiltered. They're not sitting in the room being nice to you across the table. And so periodic things like that, where I just need to get the unvarnished truth, so that way I can grow. And it's not fun. Most of us as leaders, we run from that kind of stuff because it's painful.
What a stud, Brockett. You listen, and you're obviously aware of this. That charming little grin of yours is going to get you some places, but it's not going to get you the truth in all situations. And so that's
Oh
smart.
no, no, not
Smart.
at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, the longer you've been in a place and the larger your church grows, it didn't even really matter the size of the church. You just need to know as a leader and as a preacher, from most people in your life, you're not getting the full truth
Yeah.
because they're afraid of what you'll think of them. They're afraid of what you might do to them. You might fire them. You might ostracize them. They're starstruck because you're the guy on stage. And so you got to hunt it down. Like
So good.
you've got to like look them in the eyeball and say, "Hey man, I need some feedback here." And one of the things we've just learned to say whenever we have a tough conversation as a team or even with my friends, we get done with a tough conversation and I just look at them and say, man, thanks for sharing that. I know it's probably hard for you to say. Is there are you leaving the last 10% on the table because you're afraid of what that last 10%, what that might do to our relationship or your job? And I'm giving you permission just to tell me just now. And I would say most of the time there's always something that we just sort of like hold back. And as a leader, I've just had to learn that with my team, I've got to pursue their feedback. They're not just going to willingly give it to me, and even if they did, they're probably not giving it all to me. So I've got to constantly reassure them that it's okay. That's the only way that I'm going to grow, and that's the only way we're going to grow as a group of people, is if we're being honest with each other. Now, obviously, we need to say it with a great amount of sensitivity and grace. We don't want to crush people, but we do want to get to this place. It's like all of us are creating these like narratives in our brain. The question is the narrative accurate or not? So my interaction with you right now, we could get done with this Skype call and I could go, and Jared kind of gave me this kind of weird look, or he said something about my grin, and I really wonder, kind of what Jared's really thinking about me. And did Jared? I wonder how I compared to Will Willimon's conversation, and
Yeah.
was there? And I get all of these kind of things, and what I could do is just kind of the longer I let those things ruminate, they have a tendency to drift towards the toxic.
Always.
Always. And that's true whenever you have meetings with people. That's true whenever you're dealing with your people that work for you, people that come in from your congregation to meet with you. And so if I were to then ask you about it, but I ask in an accusatory way, like, hey, Jared, you kind of said this, and what do you mean by that? And all of a sudden you're defensive and you're fearful, rather than me just going, hey, Jared, like, here's the narrative that I started to spin in my brain about our interaction. Is there anything about that that's true? Because help me understand it better. So way more not that's not nearly as intimidating posture to put you in. You don't feel like you're being attacked. And then we sort of
Yeah.
get at the truth of some stuff. Because I believe that God wants the church to grow, not in the like sexy, glamorous ways that we often think, but God wants the church to have impact within the world because of the name that we proclaim. What oftentimes I think causes the church not to grow more times than not isn't because the gospel isn't effectively being preached or clarified, although that could be the case, is toxic human interaction and the way we treat each other, beginning with elders, staff, on down into groups with people. And so, as leaders, we really hold the charge to make sure we get that right. How we interact and deal with people has got to be really healthy, because we're not just telling people the gospel, we're actually showing them how the gospel works day to day in real life relationships. And I believe that when God sees groups of people and churches doing that, he blesses them with growth and effectiveness. Um, Maybe just not in the ways that we think. Um, but it's usually not found in a great sermon or a great program. It's found in the day-to-day interactions. It's like I need to start thinking more about. I need to start thinking less about what do you think of me, and I need to start thinking more about how did I make you feel from our interaction. And that's been a hard lesson that I've had to learn and that I continue to have to remind myself of.
I appreciate you sharing that. That's it's very very transparent uh, of you. We have a we have a very similar conversation around here in our men's group, and one of the things that we refer to as all the way down to marriage when we begin to talk about marriage, and it's this idea of filling in the blanks, that everybody has a role, like you and I have a role in this conversation. And for instance, if I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, Brockett looks a little preoccupied. He looks like maybe I'm cutting into his late lunch because, whatever it might be, it's not my responsibility or business to engage in what I think you might be thinking.
Yeah.
And what happens a lot of times, I get to sit with a lot of married couples, and oftentimes there is, like you said a minute ago, that narrative that we're piecing together bit by bit, and we will begin to fabricate some idea inside of our mind of like, well, if it's my wife and I, well, she must be feeling this way about me because I woke up this morning, I rushed out of the house. I always do the dishes, but I didn't do them this morning. I didn't take out the trash, and then she's a little standoffish in the afternoon. I bet she's pissed that I didn't do the dishes, and she's probably pissed I didn't take out the garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm filling in the blank, and so then that shades how I'm going to interact with her. And so I'm a little reserved, and then at the end of the evening, she says, "Why are you so standoffish? How did this even happen?" It's such
Yeah.
a strange deal, but we do it in all of our relationships. I'm afraid, where we spend
Oh
so
yeah.
much time on both sides of the. It's like the guy who plays chess by himself, constantly spinning the board,
Oh
trying
yeah.
to outmaneuver. It's a little dark, a little twisted. Yeah, that's I think we all go to that place way too often.
Absolutely. And you begin to figure this out in your interpersonal connections. It'll make you a better preacher.
Explain that to me.
Uh, well, emotional intelligence is huge when it comes to preaching because your people have to feel connected to you.
Okay.
I mean, you've got to be able to connect with where people are sitting in the seats. And I think that preaching is more than exposition. Preaching is more than teaching. Preaching is more than exhortation or all this stuff that we put to it, like all these ingredients that you're to say, hey man, what makes a great sermon? And we could throw out all kinds of ingredients to make a great sermon. And it could be a good sermon. What makes it a great one is when you connect with people. I mean, just think about some of the best communicators and preachers that you know of. Some of them may be theologically brilliant. Some of them aren't. Even and they're not like heretics. They're still solid in their belief, but they're just maybe not as gifted in explaining a theological concept. But what makes them so great, or when you just really get wrapped into it, is when you just feel a connection to them. And I think that's where like emotional intelligence just comes into play. Um, I think for me, it's one thing for me to sit down and say, what's this passage say and what's it mean and how do I apply it? whole other question to say, how, if I'm sitting in the seats, would I receive it? And what objections do I have? What questions do I have? Here's the kicker. What questions would I have if I didn't have a Christian worldview? What questions would I have if I had a bad church experience?
Yeah, shoot.
All those kinds of things. Because then, and then it just even just acknowledging it from up front, um, and it disarms people. And I think that one of the things that I love about when I know that a sermon is connected to somebody is when they just go, man, you just feel so real to me.
Hmm.
Or this is such a big place, but I feel like I know you. I've never, I mean, we've half my church isn't even in the same room with me when I'm preaching a sermon. Half my church hasn't ever met me in person. They've just seen me on a screen. But I'll bump into them out around town, and they'll go, I've never even been in the same room with you, but I feel like I know you. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with like I really explained a passage well. It has everything to do with there was something that happened where I connected with them at an emotional level that let them know they're not alone. Somebody understands. You know, you kind of crawled into my brain and you sort of beat me to the objections. And what I love is that, it's that whole, like, I think it was a Spurgeon who said it, you don't need to defend the lion, just let it out of the cage. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean the Bible's going to devour you. It just means that the Bible knows the Bible will connect with you. The Bible, you just got to let it do what it's going to do. And so for me, I think I've grown as a preacher. Um, the more I've grown in my emotional intelligence and the more conflicts that I've had with people on staff and all that kind of stuff as we've sorted through it, it's just seeped itself out more and more in my preaching and teaching. It's been a gift. It's been a
Yeah.
painful lesson to learn, but it's been a gift.
Yeah. Two questions. Well, let's go with what emotional intelligence test did you take? Excuse me.
I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was an outside consultant that did it for us. I can't remember offhand. I could get it for you later, but it was a consultant that led us through it. There's other ones obviously that you can take. I mean, there's like a whole battery of tests I think that we're all kind of familiar with that can kind of help us to understand not only our giftedness but where our personalities are wired. Um, but that EQ thing, man, like being able to really figure out. I even pick up on it now, like when I'm talking to people. Um, I even had a conversation with my wife yesterday. I had somebody call me and she goes, "How'd the phone call go?" And I go, "Well, it was good, but they're lacking a little bit of social awareness. Like
Yeah.
just they're just not picking up on cues."
Right.
Uh, but there's lots of I think there's even several books. I have a couple on my shelf that talk about. Yeah, it's right there. Your Brain at Work by David Rock. Um, Brain Savvy Leaders by Charles Stone. Um, Obviously, the Emotionally Healthy Church would be a title that maybe a lot of people would be familiar with.
Uh, Introvert, extrovert.
Introvert,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that would be my natural wiring. Um, in the sense, like growing up, like everybody always told me I was shy. I didn't know what that was. Like it always confused me. And then I took it as a criticism for a really, really long time because I think people usually like when you're a kid growing up, like the way that people ask it is just like, hey, why don't you like people, or why are you socially awkward, or
Right.
and all that. And I didn't ever understand it. Girlfriends would break up with me all the time because I wouldn't talk to them, and I just didn't understand. I didn't understand what that was all about.
Right.
Uh, so I think that, I mean, and that definitely, I think, hurt me as a younger leader. I mean, because I would come across unintentionally as sort of standoffish, or people would tell me I'm hard to read. I'm more of a thinker, processor. My wife has helped me with all this tremendously. She's been such a gift. She's an introvert as well, but she's a feeler, and she is a 9 on the Enneagram, which means that she can really connect to what you're feeling as soon as she sits down with you for a few minutes. And so she's been really, really helpful for me in that. But I'm still an introvert in the sense that I need time away to recharge, but I love being around people. And so I've just learned how to prepare myself for when I'm going to be with people. And then, and I'm more aware of how I'm coming across, I think, than what I used to be. so I can make adjustments.
When you Sabbath, or when you take your day off, or when you try to get away from to go recharge, um, is this a thing you need to go do with your family? A thing you need to do without your family? Both? Um,
Yeah, both. I mean, I think I need weekly time, like a day or a half day, where I can sort of be away from the office and kind of be by myself just to process and think things through. But then I also need time with my family on a daily basis, really. I mean, evenings are so um, crucial for us just to be able to sit, to be together as a family. But then making sure that we are planning trips throughout the year that as a family, more than vacation time, but really just time for us to all get away
gotcha.
and interact with each other. My wife and I, neither one, we got married, I think, assuming that the other one would plan all the vacations. And that didn't happen. And so we'd come up on spring break and look at each other like, what are we going to do? And, neither one of us had planned anything, and it would cause an argument. And so now I've actually, with the help of like my assistant, she'll actually look at our year for us and say, hey, here's the times throughout your year when you guys typically get out on, how do you want me to help? And so that's been huge for us have those moments to look forward to as a family.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Enneagram, it keeps coming up. I keep talking to people and they keep telling me I need to get it, read it, take it,
Yeah.
do the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, need to.
Yeah. It's a helpful tool. I mean, there's some people that don't like it. There can be some weird stuff, I think, associated with it. I think honestly, it's probably been the one personality profile tool that's helped Lindsay and I in our marriage the most out of anything.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
been very helpful. Our executive team has taken it. Our Lindsay and I've taken it. We've had our kids take it, so that way we kind of know where our kids kind of fall on it. And it's just a helpful grid, because each of the numbers, I think there's nine, or I think there's nine numbers, 9 personality profiles. But there's a healthy version of you, and there's an unhealthy version of you. And so to us, just being able to have that as a reference point for conversation has been helpful.
Yeah. I'll get that on my list of things I obviously need to get done because I hear it's great. I hear it's great. I got a buddy who called me and he said, "You've got to get this. It's up your alley. It's perfect. You'll know
Yeah.
so much about so many people. You won't stop. It'll just." And I said, "Listen, that's the last thing I need for my brain to one more thing that it gets hung up on. That's the last thing I need.
Yeah.
So
Well, if you're not familiar with the Enneagram, it may not make a lot of sense to you, but a lot of preachers are threes on the Enneagram. So it's very
okay.
interesting.
Can you explain what a three is? Just
A three is an achiever. So achieving things, appearing successful, having the respect and admiration of others. It's high value to a three. And all that stuff kind of sound. In fact, I've talked to people that it doesn't matter where they are on the Enneagram. When they hear their number explained, just about everybody kind of cringes because they're like, "Ugh, I don't want to be that." But there's a healthy version of that, and there's an unhealthy version of that. So what's really, I mean, because I'm an introvert, or even, I mean, there's a lot of preachers that are introverts, but what motivates them to be on stage is the fact that they're a three. And so there can be a healthy version of that and then an unhealthy version of it. And so just understand, I can actually tell when I start to drift into being an unhealthy version of a three. It's a moment for me to actually confess that to somebody, have somebody be willing to call that out of me, and make sure I stay healthy with it. But,
good for you. Good for
yeah.
you. I like it. I like it. Um, Aaron, here's the deal. I got a lot of people around me who are busted up by the church because the bride of Christ. She's pretty, and sometimes she's really really sweet, and then sometimes she
Yeah.
she kind of goes bananas, and she kicks somebody out. She throw them in the street. She can just kind of be a little, and I love her, and
Yeah.
I love her because he loves her.
Yeah.
But she's a little rough. She's a little rough on folks like us sometimes. with the number of guys that I get to spend time with, um, who hopefully I can get them to sit down and listen to this podcast or watch this podcast. What's the thing that you tell guys who are in that place to where they've been beat up by the church? And maybe even to make this a little easier, what's a place that you've been built back up? You've had some sort of healing moment with the church, or somebody brought this to you and helped you heal something, or helped you be healed of something inside of this struggle and the turmoil of ministry and some of the things that get there, that you could share with some of these guys.
Yeah, I would say that there isn't anybody that is immune to it. That if someone's, particularly if we're talking about pastors, preachers, people on staff of the church, if that's who we're specifically talking to, um, then I would say that if you feel that way right now, or if you have felt that way, you're not alone. Um, I can't think of a single pastor of any size church, and I'm talking like pastors of churches of 40,000 people all the way down to 4 people, and every single one of them can tell you a story of how they've been hurt or beat up by the church or someone within the church. It's probably maybe a little bit more of an accurate way to say it.
Agreed.
Um, Now, obviously, if you've got um, an eldership that's over you that maybe has hurt you in some significant way, that might be a little bit of a different thing than just a critical email that comes in. I think those are pains at different, those are different kinds of pains. Because I feel like if I've got my eldership and my immediate staff team around me, I can weather, and my wife around me, I can weather just about anything. Um, I've always felt like, but if something got sideways with my wife or with my leadership team or my eldership, then that's a really, really bad day. Um, but I think that anytime I go through highs and lows, and they're here, I mean, I think that it doesn't matter what kind of season we're in. We're in a really sweet season in the life of our church right now where I feel like things are going really well. God's moving in tremendous ways. Constant, uh, incredible stories continue to flow in, and yet I'm I'm aware of the fact that on any given day, a hurt of some kind could reach me, whether it's through email or a conversation or whatever. Um, and they come in different kinds of ways. Sometimes it's because I just did something stupid, so I deserve it. Sometimes it's somebody else is hurting and they don't know how to deal with it well, so they just take it out on you. Sometimes it's misunderstanding, and sometimes it's I think the times when I've been hurt the most is when people who have been on this journey with us over the last decade, they've watched what God has done, and they leave the church.
Mm.
And it's like, and honestly, like the way that the reason why they leave the church isn't because we're right and they're wrong, or they're right and we're wrong, or whatever. It's like we've outgrown where they are, or we're in a different place, maybe philosophically than where they are, and it's fine. Um, but it still hurts, I think, at times because it's like, man, I believe in this vision so much, I bleed for it, and they're sort of like, well, I'd rather go over here because for whatever reason, and that just can knock the wind out of your sails. So I think that uh, if we think that we'll never be hurt by people, then we make ourselves more vulnerable to the hurts of people. I think we've always got to be. Um, I had a mentor of mine a long time ago. I don't think it's necessarily anything super original, although I just have to keep reminding myself of it. Because he said, man, if you're going to survive, you've got to develop thick skin like a rhino, and then you've got to develop the courage of a lion, and then you have to have the heart of a teddy bear. And you get those things confused, and you come across like a lion, then you're going to cause more hurt and pain
Mm.
on your life. But um, anyway, I always, I think in those valley moments, I'm always just asking myself, man, what can I learn from this? Because it's a season. That's what it is. It's a season. And God, what are you trying to teach me through this? How can I grow from it? and be a better, more effective, more empathetic leader and human being.
It's very insightful, very helpful. I appreciate you opening up and talking about that. You know what I find really interesting about you, and I hope you don't mind me saying this. What I find very interesting about you is for a guy that is at his own admittance, an introvert, somewhat of a guarded individual. There is a disciplined transparency and self-disclosure to you that makes you so approachable and causes, I think, causes me, and I assume others, to trust your leadership for that reason. Because everything that you, not everything, the way you're wired, you push against that in a holy way. And what it does is it puts you on the plane of, you know what, you're a guy that's wrestling with your own stuff, and you're letting me get to see it, and I appreciate that so much. And I want you to know I appreciate that about you. Thank you for doing that.
Oh,
that's very good.
Well, thanks, Jared. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate it.
No trouble. No trouble. Well, Mr. Brockett, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your wisdom. I thank you for the work that you're doing where you are. So thank you so much for your time. And if you don't mind, I'm going to shoot you another email later on today, and I'll be in touch with you.
Sounds good. I appreciate it, Jared. Thanks for what you do.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. See you.
See you.